Hello, welcome to Reading the Lockdown Away. We're way more than halfway through reading Moby Dick by Herman Melville, and today we start from the chapter The Honor and Glory of Whaling. There are some enterprises in which a careful disorderliness is the true method. The more I dive into this matter of whaling and push my researches up to the very spring head of it, so much the more I am impressed with its great honorableness and antiquity. And especially when I find so many great demigods and heroes, prophets of all sorts, who one way or other have shed distinction upon it. I am transported with the reflection that I myself belong, though but subordinately, to so emblazoned a fraternity. The gallant Perseus, a son of Jupiter, was the first whaleman, and to the eternal honor of our calling be it said, the first whale attacked by our brotherhood was not killed with any sordid intent. Those were the nightly days of our profession, when we only bore arms to succor the distressed and not to fill men's lamp feeders. Everyone knows the fine story of Perseus and Andromeda, how the lovely Andromeda, the daughter of a king, was tied to a rock on the sea coast, and as Leviathan was in the very act of carrying her off, Perseus, the prince of whalemen, intrepidly advancing, harpooned the monster, and delivered and married the maid. It was an admirable artistic exploit, rarely achieved by the best harpooneers of the present day, inasmuch as this Leviathan was slain at the very first dart. And let no man doubt this archaic story, for in the ancient Joppa, now Jaffa, on the Syrian coast, in one of the pagan temples, there stood for many ages the vast skeleton of a whale, which the city's legends and all the inhabitants asserted to be the identical bones of the monster that Perseus slew. When the Romans took Joppa, the same skeleton was carried to Italy in triumph. What seems most singular and suggestively important in this story is this: it was from Joppa that Jonah set sail. Akin to the adventure of Perseus and Andromeda, indeed, by some supposed to be indirectly derived from it, is that famous story of St. George and the dragon, which dragon I maintain to have been a whale, for in many old chronicles whales and dragons are strangely jumbled together, and often stand for each other. Thou art as a lion of waters, and as a dragon of the sea, said Ezekiel, hereby plainly meaning a whale. In true, some versions of the Bible use that word itself. Besides, it would much abstract from the glory of the exploit had St. George but encountered a crawling reptile of the land, instead of doing battle with the great monster of the deep. Any man may kill a snake, but only a Perseus at St. George, a coffin, have the heart in them to march boldly up to a whale. Let not the modern paintings of this scene mislead us, for though the creature encountered by that valiant whaleman of old is vaguely represented of a griffin-like shape, and though the battle is depicted on land and the saint on horseback, yet considering the great ignorance of those times, when the true form of the whale was unknown to artists, and considering that, as in Perseus's case, St. George's whale might have crawled up out of the sea on the beach, and considering that the animal ridden by St. George might have been only a large seal or a seahorse, bearing all this in mind, it will not appear altogether incompatible with the sacred legend and the ancientest drafts of the scene. To hold this so-called dragon no other than the great Leviathan himself. In fact, placed before the strict and piercing truth, This whole story will fare like the fish, flesh, and fowl idol of the Philistines, dragon by name, who being planted before the ark of Israel, his horse's head and both the palms of his hands fell off from him, and only the stump or fishy part of him remained. Thus, then, one of our own noble stamp, even a whaleman, is the tutelary guardian of England, and by good rights we harpooneers of Nantucket should be enrolled in the most noble order of St. George, and therefore let not the knights of that honourable company, none of whom, I venture to say, have ever had to do with a whale like their great patron, let them never eye a Nantucketer with disdain, since even in our woolen frocks and tarred trousers we are much better entitled to St. George's decoration than they. Whether to admit Hercules among us or not, concerning this I long remained dubious. For though, according to the Greek mythologies and antique Crockett and Kit Carson, that brawny doer of rejoicing good deeds was swallowed down and thrown up by a whale, still, whether that strictly makes a whaleman of him, that might be mooted. It nowhere appears that he ever actually harpooned his fish, unless, indeed, from the inside. Nevertheless, he may be deemed a sort of involuntary whaleman. At any rate, the whale caught him. If he did not, the whale. I claim him for one of our clan. But by the best contradictory authorities, this Grecian story of Hercules and the whale is considered to be derived from the still more ancient Hebrew story of Jonah and the whale, and vice versa. Certainly, they are very similar. If I claim the demigod, then why not the prophet? Nor do heroes, saints, demigods, and prophets alone comprise the whole roll of our order. Our Grand Master is still to be named, for like royal kings of old times, we find the headwaters of our fraternity in nothing short of the great gods themselves. That wondrous oriental story is now to be rehearsed from the Shastra, which gives us the dread Vishnu, one of the three persons in the Godhead of the Hindus. Give us this divine Vishnu, himself for our Lord. Vishnu, who, by the first of his 10 earthly incarnations, has forever set apart and sanctified the whale. When Brahma, or the God of gods, saith the Shastra, resolved to recreate the world after one of its periodical dissolutions, he gave birth to Vishnu to preside over the work. But the Vedas, or mystical books, whose perusal would seem to have been indispensable to Vishnu before beginning the creation, and which therefore must have contained something in the shape of practical hints to young architects. These Vedas were lying at the bottom of the waters, so Vishnu became incarnate in a whale, and sounding down in him to the uttermost depths rescued the sacred volumes. Was not this Vishnu a whaleman then, even as a man who rides a horse is called a horseman? Perseus, St. George, Hercules, Jonah, and Vishnu, there is a member roll for you. What club but the whaleman's can head off like that? Talk about being a little too proud of your own profession. Jesus, wow. Anyways. Next chapter. Jonah historically regarded. My goodness. Reference was made to the historical study of Jonah and the whale in the preceding chapter. Now, some Nantucketers rather distrust this historical story of Jonah and the whale. But then there were some skeptical Greeks and Romans who, standing out from the orthodox pagans of their times, equally doubted the story of Hercules and the whale, and Arion and the dolphin. And yet their doubting those traditions did not make those traditions one with the less facts, for all that. One old Sag Harbor whaleman's chief reason for questioning the Hebrew story was this. He had one of those quaint, old-fashioned Bibles, embellished with curious, unscientific plates, one of which represented Jonah's whale with two spouts in his head, a peculiarity only true with respect to a species of the Leviathan, the right whale, and the varieties of that order, concerning which the fishermen have this saying, a penny roll would choke him. His swallow is so very small. But to this, Bishop Jebb's anticipative answer is ready. It is not necessary, hints the bishop, that we consider Jonah as tombed in the whale's belly, but as temporarily lodged in some part of his mouth. And this seems reasonable enough in the good bishop, for truly the right whale's mouth would accommodate a couple of whist tables and comfortably seat all of the players. Possibly, too, Jonah might have ensconced himself in a hollow tooth, but on second thoughts the right whale is toothless. Another reason which Sag Harbor, he went by that name, urged for his want of faith in this matter of the prophet was something obscurely in reference to his incarcerated body and the whale's gastric juices. But this objection likewise falls to the ground, because a German exegetist supposes that Jonah must have taken refuge in the floating body of a dead whale, even as the French soldiers in the Russian campaign turned their dead horses into tents and crawled into them. Besides, it has been divined by other continental commentators that when Jonah was thrown overboard from the Joppa ship, he straightway effected his escape to another vessel nearby, some vessel with a whale for a figurehead, and I would add, possibly called the whale, as some crafter nowadays christened the shark, the gull, and the eagle. Nor have there been wanting learned exegetists. Who are these? Learned exegetists who have opinioned that the whale mentioned in the book of Jonah merely meant a life preserver, an inflated bag of wind, which the endangered prophet swam to, and so was saved from a watery doom. Poor Sag Harbor, therefore, seems worsted all round. But he had still another reason for his want of faith. It was this: if I remember right, Jonah was swallowed by the whale in the Mediterranean Sea, and after 3 days he was vomited up somewhere within 3 days' journey of Nineveh, a city on the Tigris. Very much more than 3 days' journey across from the nearest point of the Mediterranean coast. How is that? But was there no other way for the whale to land the prophet within the short distance of Nineveh? Yes. He might have carried him round by the way of the Cape of Good Hope, but not to speak of the passage through the whole length of the Mediterranean, and another passage up the Persian Gulf and Red Sea. Such a supposition would involve the complete circumnavigation of all Africa in 3 days, not to speak of the Tigris waters, near the site of Nineveh, being too shallow for any whale to swim in. Besides, this idea of Jonah weathering the Cape of Good Hope, at so early a day would rest the honor of the discovery of the great headland from Bartholomew Diaz. Bartholomew Diaz. Oh, that's been such a long while that I've heard this name. Anyways, let me start from the start of this sentence, which is here. Besides, this idea of Jonah's weathering the Cape of Good Hope at so early a day would rest the honor of the discovery of that great headland from Bartholomew Diaz, its reputed discoverer, and so make modern history a liar. But all these foolish arguments of old Sag Harbor only evinced his foolish pride of reason, a thing still more reprehensible in him. seeing that he had but little learning except that he had picked up from the sun and the sea. Except what he had picked up from the sun and the sea. I say it only shows his foolish, impious pride and abominable, devilish rebellion against the reverend clergy. For by a Portuguese Catholic priest, this very idea of Jonah's going to Nineveh via the Cape of Good Hope was advanced as a signal magnification of the general miracle, and so it was. Besides, to this day, the highly enlightened Turks devoutly believe in the historical story of Jonah, and some 3 centuries ago, an English traveler in old Harris's Voyages speaks of a Turkish mosque built in honor of Jonah, in which mosque was a miraculous lamp that burned without any oil. Pitch poling. To make them run easily and swiftly, the axles of carriages are anointed, and for much the same purpose some whalers perform an analogous operation upon their boat. They grease the bottom. Nor is it to be doubted that as such a procedure can do no harm, it may possibly be of no contemptible advantage, considering that oil and water are hostile, that oil is a sliding thing, and that the object in view is to make the boat slide bravely. Quickwig believed strongly in anointing his boat, and one morning, not long after the German ship Jungfrau disappeared, took more than customary pains in that occupation, crawling under its bottom where it hung over the side, and rubbing in the unctuousness as though diligently seeking to ensure a crop of hair from the craft's bald keel. He seemed to be working in obedience to some particular presentiment, nor did it remain unwarranted by the event. Towards noon, whales were raised, but so soon as the ship sailed down to them, they turned and fled with swift precipitancy, a disordered flight, as of Cleopatra's barges from Actium. Nevertheless, the boats pursued, and Stubbs was foremost. By great exertion, Tashtego at last succeeded in planting one iron, but the stricken whale, without at all sounding, still continued his horizontal flight, with added fleetness. Such unintermitted strainings upon the planted iron must sooner or later inevitably extract it. It became imperative to lance the flying whale, or be content to lose him. But to haul the boat up to its flank was impossible. He swam so fast and furious. What then remained? Of all the wondrous devices and dexterities, the sleights of hand and countless subtleties to which the veteran whaleman is so often forced, none exceed that fine maneuver with the lance called pitch-poling. Small sword or broadsword, in all its exercises boasts nothing like it. It is only indispensable with an inveterate running whale. Its grand fact and feature in the wonderful distance to which the long lance is accurately darted from a violently rocking, jerking boat under extreme headway, steel and wood included. The entire spear is some 10 or 12 feet in length. The staff is much slighter than that of the harpoon, and also of a lighter material, pine. It is furnished with a small rope called a warp, of considerable length, by which it can be hauled back to the hand after darting. But before going further, it is important to mention here that though the harpoon may be pitch-poled in the same way with the lance, yet it is seldom done, and when done is still less frequently successful, on account of the greater weight and inferior length of the harpoon as compared with the lance, which in effect becomes serious drawbacks. As a general thing, therefore, you must first get fast to a whale before any pitch-poling comes into play. Look now at Stubb, a man who, from his humorous, deliberate coolness and equanimity in the direst emergencies, was especially qualified to excel in pitch bowling. Look at him. He stands upright in the tossed bow of the flying boat, wrapped in fleecy foam. The towing whale is 40 feet ahead, handling the long lance lightly, glancing twice or thrice along its length to see if it be exactly straight. Stubb whistlingly gathers up the coil of the warp in one hand, so as to secure its free end in his grasp, leaving the rest unobstructed. Then, holding the lance full before his waistband's middle, he levels it at the whale. When covering him with it, he steadily depresses the butt end in his hand, thereby elevating the point till the weapon stands fairly balanced upon his palm, 15 feet in the air. He minds you somewhat of a juggler, balancing a long staff on his chin. Next moment, with a rapid, nameless impulse, in a superb, lofty arch and bright steel, spans the foaming distance and quivers in the life spot of the whale. Instead of sparkling water, he now spouts red blood.
"That drove the spigot out of him,"
cries Stubb.
"'Tis July's immortal 4th. All fountains must run wine today. Would now it were old Orleans whiskey, or old Ohio, or unspeakable old Monongahela. Then, dash they go, lad. I'd have ye hold a cannikin to the jet, and we'd drink round it. Yeah, verily, hearts alive, would brew choice punch in the spread of his spout hole there, and from that live punch bowl quaff the living stuff."
Again and again, to such a gamesome talk, the dexterous dart is repeated, the spear returning to its master like a greyhound held in skillful leash. The agonized whale goes into its flurry. The tow line is slackened, and the pitch poler, dropping astern, folds his hands and mutely watches the monster die. Let's read another chapter. The Fountain, one of my favorite movies. That for 6,000 years, and no one knows how many millions of ages before, the great whales should have been spouting all over the sea, and sprinkling and mystifying the gardens of the deep, as with so many sprinkling or mystifying pots. And that for some centuries back, thousands of hunters should have been close by the fountain of the whale, watching these sprinklings and spoutings, that all these should be. I thought I had put it in silent, but anyways. That all these should be, and yet that down to this blessed minute, 15 1/4 minutes past 1 o'clock p.m. of the 16th day of December, AD 1851, it should still remain a problem, whether these spoutings are, after all, really water, or nothing but vapor. This is surely a noteworthy thing. Let us then look at this matter, along with some interesting items contingent. Everyone knows that by the peculiar cunning of their gills, the finny tribes in general breathe the air which at all times is combined with the element in which they swim. Hence, a herring or a cod might live a century, and never once raise its head above the surface. But owing to his marked internal structure, which gives him regular lungs like a human being's, the whale can only live by inhaling the disengaged air in the open atmosphere. Wherefore the necessity of his periodical visits to the upper world. But he cannot in any degree breathe through his mouth, for in his ordinary attitude the sperm whale's mouth is buried at least 8 feet beneath the surface. And what is still more, his windpipe has no connection with his mouth. No, he breathes through the spiracle alone, and this is on the top of his head. If I say that in any creature breathing is only a function indispensable to vitality, inasmuch as it withdraws from the air a certain element which, being subsequently brought into contact with the blood, imparts to the blood its vivifying principle. I do not think I shall err, though I may possibly use some superfluous scientific words. Humid, and it follows that if all the blood in a man could be aerated with one breath, he might then seal up his nostrils and not fetch another for a considerable time. This is to say that he would then live without breathing. Anomalous as it may seem, this is precisely the case with the whale, who systematically lives by intervals, his full hour and more, when at the bottom, without drawing a single breath, or so much as in any way inhaling a particle of air, for remember, he has no gills. How is this? Between his ribs and on each side of his spine he is supplied with a remarkable, involved, Cretan labyrinth of vermicelli-like vessels, which vessels, when he quits the surface, are completely distended with oxygenated blood, so that for an hour or more, 1,000 fathoms in the sea, he carries a surplus stock of vitality in him, just as the camel crossing the waterless desert carries a surplus supply of drink for future use in its 4 supplementary stomachs. The anatomical fact of this labyrinth is indisputable, and that the supposition founded upon it is reasonable and true. Seems the more cogent to me than when I consider the otherwise inexplicable obstinacy of that Leviathan in having his spoutings out, as the fishermen phrase it. This is what I meant. If unmolested upon rising to the surface, the sperm whale will continue there for a period of time exactly uniform with all his other unmolested risings. Say he strays 11 minutes and jets 70 times, and respires 70 breaths. Then whenever he rises again, he will be sure to have his 70 breaths over again to a minute. Now, if after he fetches a few breaths you alarm him, so that he sounds, he will be always dodging up again to make good his regular allowance of air, and not till those 70 breaths are told will he finally go down to stay out his full term below. Remark, however, that in different individuals these rates are different, but in any one they are alike. Now, why should the whale thus insist upon having his spoutings out, unless it be to replenish his reservoir of air descending for no good? How obvious is it too that this necessity for the whale's rising exposes him to all the fatal hazards of the chase, for not by hook or by net could this vast Leviathan be caught, when sailing 1,000 fathoms beneath the sunlight. Not so much they skill, then, O hunter, as the great necessities that strike the victory to thee. In man, breathing is necessary, going on, one breath only serving for 2 or 3 pulsations, so that whatever other business he has to attend to, waking or sleeping, breathe he must, or die he will. But the sperm whale only breathes about 1/7 or Sunday of his time. It has been said that the whale only breathes through his spout hole. If it could truthfully be added that his spouts are mixed with water, then I opine we should be furnished with the reason why his sense of smell seems obliterated in him. For the only thing about him that at all answers to his nose is that identical spout hole, and being so clogged with 2 elements, it could not be expected to have the power of smelling. But, owing to the mystery of the spout, whether it be water or whether it be vapor, no absolute certainty can as yet be arrived at on his head. Sure, it is nevertheless that the sperm whale has no proper olfactories. But what does he want of them? No roses, no violets, no cologne water in the sea. Furthermore, as his windpipe solely opens into the tube of his spouting canal, and as the long canal, like the Grand Erie Canal, is furnished with a sort of locks that opens and shut for the downward retention of air or the upward exclusion of water. Therefore the whale has no voice, unless you insult him by saying that when he so strangely rumbles, he talks through his nose. But then again, what has the whale to say? Seldom have I known any profound being that had anything to say to this world, unless forced to stammer out something by way of getting a living. Oh, happy that the world is such an excellent listener. Now the spouting canal of the sperm whale, chiefly intended as it is for the conveyance of air, and for several feet laid along horizontally just beneath the upper surface of his head, and a little to one side. This curious canal is very much like a gas pipe laid down in a city on one side of a street. But the question returns whether this gas pipe is also a water pipe. In other words, whether the spout of the sperm whale is the mere vapor of the exalted breath, or whether that exhaled, I'm going to start from but again. But the question returns whether this gas pipe is also a water pipe. In other words, whether the spout of the sperm whale is the mere vapor of the exhaled breath, or whether the exhaled breath is mixed with water, taken in at the mouth, and discharged through the spiracle. It is certain that the mouth indirectly communicates with the spouting canal, but it cannot be proved that this is for the purpose of discharging water through the spiracle, because the greatest necessity for so doing would seem to be when in feeding he accidentally takes in water. But the sperm whale's food is far beneath the surface, and there he cannot spout even if he would. Besides, if you regard him very closely, and time him with your watch, you will find that when unmolested there is an undeviating rhyme between the periods of his jets and the ordinary periods of respiration. But why pester one with all these reasoning on the subject? Speak out. You have seen him spout. Then declare what the spout is. Can you not tell water from air, my dear sir? In this world it is not so easy to settle these plain things. I have ever found your plain things the naughtiest of all, and as for this whale spout, you might almost stand in it, and yet be undecided as to what it is precisely. The central body of it is hidden in the snowy sparkling mist enveloping it, and how can you certainly tell whether any water falls from it, when always when you are close enough to a whale to get a close view of his spout, he is in a prodigious commotion, the water cascading all around him, and if at such times you should think that you really perceive drops of moisture in the spout, how do you know that they are not merely condensed from its vapor? Or how do you know that they are not those identical drops superficially lodged in the spout hole fissure, which is countersunk into the summit of the whale's head? For even when tranquilly swimming through the midday sea in a calm, with his elevated hump sun-dried as a dromedary's in the desert, even then the whale always carries a small basin of water on his head, as under a blazing sun you will sometimes see a cavity in a rock filled up with rain. Nor is it at all prudent for the hunter to be over-curious touching the precise nature of the whale spout. It will not do for him to be peering into it, and putting his face in it. You cannot go with your pitcher to this fountain and fill it, and bring it away, for even when coming into slight contact with the outer vapory shreds of the jet, which will often happen, your skin will feverishly smart from the acridness of the thing so touching it, and I know one who coming into still closer contact with the spout, whether with some specific object in view or otherwise. I cannot say. The skin peeled off from his cheek and arm, whereof among whalemen the spout is deemed poisonous. They try to evade it. Another thing I have heard it said, and I do not much doubt it, that if the jet is fairly spouted into your eyes, it will blind you. The wisest thing the investigator can do then, it seems to me, is to let this deadly spout alone. Still, we can hypothesize, even if we cannot prove and establish. My hypothesis is this, that the spout is nothing but mist, and besides other reasons, to this conclusion I am impelled by considerations touching the great inherent dignity and sublimity of the sperm whale. I account him no common, shallow being, inasmuch as it is an undisputed fact that he is never found on soundings. He is never found on soundings, or near shores, or other whales sometimes are. All other whales sometimes are. He is both ponderous and profound, and I am convinced that from the heads of all ponderous, profound beings, such as Plato, Pyrrho, the devil, Jupiter, Dante, and so on, there always goes up a certain semi-visible steam which, in the act of thinking deep thoughts, while composing a little treatise on eternity, I had the curiosity to place a mirror before me, and ere long saw reflected there a curious involved warming and undulation in the atmosphere over my head. The invariable moisture of my hair, while plunged in deep thought after 6 cups of hot tea in my thin, shingled attic of an August noon. This seems an additional argument for the above supposition. And how nobly it raises our conceit of the mighty, misty monster to behold him, solemnly sailing through a calm tropical sea, his vast mild head overhung by a canopy of vapor, engendered by his incommunicable contemplations, and that vapor, as you will sometimes see, glorified by a rainbow, as if heaven itself had put its seal upon his thoughts. For just see, rainbows do not visit the clear air, they only radiate vapor, and so, through all the thick mists of the dim doubts in my mind, divine intuitions now and then shoot, enkindling my fog with a heavenly ray. Why? No one knows I exist. Why? And for this I thank God. For all have doubts, many deny, but doubts or denials. Many deny, but doubts or denials. Few along with them have intuitions. I'm really sorry, excuse my cell phone. And excuse anyone who's trying to reach me. Why? Doubts of all things earthly, and intuitions of some things heavenly. This combination makes neither believer nor infidel, but makes a man who regards them both with equal eye. I'm growing to like this author again. But anyways, I'm really sorry about my cell phone. I thought I had muted it, but clearly I didn't. And yeah, as I said, these were promotional messages. Yeah. Anyways, ha de bra.